I'm Dawn.
I'm Matt.
We gotta be back by dark.
We'll see.
The movie industry, or really any industry where you're in the public eye, can be difficult to navigate. You have to live your everyday life with a certain level of caution to maintain a career in these industries. A career where people are watching your every move and your success is largely measured by public opinion. Cancel culture may be a modern term, but celebrities were already getting canceled over 100 years ago. Just ask Fatty Arbuckle. Well, you can't because this was well over 100 years ago and he is long gone. But we're going to get into how he knows all about being the leading man in a public scandal that led to dragging his name through the mud. He may have been one of the very first Hollywood stars, but he also found himself at center stage in Hollywood's first scandal that would forever change the motion picture industry.
Roscoe Conkling Arbuckle was born March 24th, 1887, in Smith Center, Kansas. He weighed anywhere from 13 to 16 pounds, depending on which article you read. All of his 8 siblings were small. His mother, Mary, was a petite woman, and William, his father, was a small, slender man. This raised suspicion to William that he may not be Roscoe's real father. Was Mary stepping out with a much larger guy on the side? The suspicions were completely unfounded, as Mary was a devout, God-fearing Christian who would never dream of infidelity. William was so sure, he named his son after New York Senator Roscoe Conkling. The senator was known as a womanizer and philanderer. William would often get drunk and beat Roscoe for the smallest reasons. His simmering resentment for his son was further fueled by his wife's severe health problems. Mary's health began to decline after Roscoe's birth, so it was only logical to blame him for his mother's poor health. I guess according to William, Roscoe was too big of a baby and broke her. You know, this would be the same thing as my dad, who was 5'6",
Uh huh.
claiming that me and my brother are not his kids.
I mean, he'd have a pretty good case if that's what we're going off of.
That's true.
He's a small man,
And we're big boys.
big guys. And like Roscoe's dad to say that he was such a big baby and that's why his mother had health issues from then on, complications after his birth. I guess it had nothing to do with the 8 other pregnancies and births she went through.
Well, and wasn't it like 10 years after she had him that she died or whatever?
Yes.
So
I
I don't
guess
think that was the problem.
I guess from that point when after she had him, she was just always sick after that. But I mean, if I was having to take care of 9 kids, I probably wouldn't feel too great either.
Yeah, I don't think so.
The Arbuckle family moved to Santa Ana, California when Roscoe was 8 years old. There, his schoolmates teased him for being overweight, and this is when he received the nickname of Fatty. He despised the name, but it followed him for the rest of his life. It wasn't long after they moved into the Los Angeles area that Roscoe first took the stage. A traveling theater troupe arrived in town, and they were in need of an emergency replacement for a child actor. It wasn't the most ideal role, but Roscoe was just happy to be included. Not only was he required to wear blackface, the role also required him to wear black feet, because the character was barefoot. William frequently disappeared without explanation, and they didn't ask, because his absence brought peace to the occasionally violent and turbulent home. He eventually left for good and took his oldest son with him. They were off to start new jobs in a hotel miles away from Santa Ana. Roscoe's mother died in 1898, and he was sent to live with his father. Just like many of the events in this story, there are a few variations of what happened. Roscoe traveled alone on a train, or he was chaperoned, and his father was supposed to have picked him up and never showed. Roscoe ended up walking to the hotel, but his father and brother had quickly moved on without forwarding an address. But all we know for certain is that Roscoe was sent away to live in the hotel with his father, who wasn't there. The hotel staff took pity on the homeless 11-year-old boy and offered him a room in return for doing some odd jobs around the hotel. At least he was off the streets now, and life was about to take a turn for the better for Roscoe Arbuckle.
Fatty was apparently accidentally discovered when a talent scout stayed at the hotel and just so happened to overhear Roscoe singing to himself while working. The scout encouraged him to take part in a local talent show. The acts were harshly judged by a tough crowd. If the audience cheered, your act was a success. If they began to boo, the act was dragged off stage with a shepherd's hook,
Like in Looney Tunes.
like in Looney Tunes. Roscoe attempted to sing and fool around, but his performance didn't go down as well as he had hoped. He found himself the target of vicious heckling, and in genuine fear of the approaching shepherd's hook, Roscoe panicked and executed a perfect somersault into the orchestra pit. The audience began roaring in approval, and Roscoe won the competition. Roscoe was already touring in a traveling theater group by the time he was on the verge of turning 18. He performed songs, told jokes, clowned around a bit, and demonstrated those impressive acrobatics while making a bit of a name for himself as the upcoming new star of the vaudeville company. Now, it seems to me like those people in the orchestra pit probably weren't going to be too happy.
No, it probably made quite the sound.
Brrr.
In 1908, he met and fell in love with Minta Durfee. She was a chorus girl when they met, but would later appear in silent films herself. She even went on to become the first leading lady for Charlie Chaplin. Roscoe was large and Minta was small, so people said they looked like an odd couple, but they were in love and they were married that same year. They separated in 1921, but Minta didn't file for divorce until 1925 on grounds of desertion. Arbuckle was hitting the bottle quite heavily, and the combination of his drinking and his weight led to a pretty serious bacterial infection in his leg. He was advised that he may possibly require amputation below the knee to save his life. He eventually managed to fight the infection without amputation, but it's reported that he briefly became addicted to the morphine that he had been prescribed. Despite all this, his career had never looked better.
After embarking upon a long tour of China and Japan with the vaudeville company in 1909, Roscoe's gaze finally settled on the emerging movie industry upon his return to the U.S. His very first on-screen appearance was captured the same year in the 10-minute comedy produced by the Selig Polyscope Company. A 10-minute film might seem a bit short, but this was the standard at the time because it was the maximum length that would fit onto a single film reel. After appearing in dozens and dozens of one-reelers for Keystone Studios, Arbuckle moved on to those epic two-reelers, then began forming his own production company. He was showing the world that he could write, direct, and star in his own movies.
Get it, Roscoe?
A typical Fatty Arbuckle film was a fast-paced slapstick comedy with chase scenes and the obligatory pie-to-the-face gag. Arbuckle was actually one of the first directors to ever receive a pie to the face on screen. Roscoe really disliked his nickname and was still very self-conscious about his weight. He believed using the name was inevitable, but he refused to get cheap laughs from his size. Have you ever heard of the comedian Fluffy, Gabriel Iglesias?
Yes.
He was doing an interview here a while back and was saying kind of the same thing, that he never liked being called fat. Like as a kid, he told his mom, I'm getting made fun of and stuff because I'm fat. And she said, no, you're just fluffy. So the nickname kind of stuck and he just kind of went with it. And over the years, he just kind of got used to it.
I feel like everybody knows who Fluffy is just by saying Fluffy.
I believe so.
But that is a lot like Fatty because he used it in the names of his movies and stuff. It's how he was known.
Anyways, you never saw Fatty Arbuckle stuffing his face on screen or getting stuck in a door or sitting on a collapsing chair. In fact, you are more likely to see Arbuckle perform those incredible acrobatics or break out into a delicate dance routine. This was not just an on-screen persona, he liked to keep up the demonstrations of elegant ability even off-camera.
Canadian actor Max Sennett recalls that when he met Arbuckle for the first time, he was left gobsmacked when Arbuckle skipped up the stairs as lightly as Fred Astaire, and then without warning went into a feather-light step, clapped his hands, and did a backward somersault as graceful as a girl tumbler. It's clear that Arbuckle wanted to be recognized as a truly talented performer rather than just a man who was funny because he was overweight. He once said in a 1917 quote, "I refuse to make people laugh at my bulk." It does seem a bit odd that the name Fatty appears in the title of 27 of his short films. He might not like it, but it's making him money, so he used it. But if you ever dared call him that to his face, he would respond with, "I got a name, you know." Although Roscoe Arbuckle is often described as a contemporary of those cinematic legends Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, he was actually more of a mentor to them. Buster got his first big break from Arbuckle, and later he said he learned it all from Fatty. Arbuckle could also be credited for discovering the comedian, actor, and entertainer Bob Hope. Thanks to Roscoe Arbuckle, he got his first job with the touring trip. Hope would go on to enjoy a career spanning nearly 8 decades. It was perhaps Buster Keaton that shared the most chemistry with Arbuckle, as they appeared in around 14 short films together and became very close buddies. In fact, in 1920, Arbuckle relinquished control of his comic production company to Buster. This might seem extreme to just hand over your successful company to a friend, but Arbuckle didn't have the time to run his own business anymore. He just landed a new contract with Paramount to appear in 18 different feature-length films over the next 3 years. Arbuckle would be paid $3 million in total, making him the highest-paid actor in Hollywood. He was the first to secure a contract worth over $1 million a year. This contract had a stipulation. He was not allowed to slip below 250 pounds, and he would be given a bonus every time he gained another 50 pounds.
I think that's absolutely crazy
Yeah.
that your salary is dependent upon how much weight you can gain.
Yeah. Usually you hear stories about it being the opposite.
Yeah, that's very true. On the 5th of September, Roscoe Arbuckle decided to throw a party. He drove down to San Francisco and rented out a whole suite of 3 connecting rooms at the top floor of the St. Francis Hotel for a weekend-long party.
Weekend long party.
I mean, that's the only way to party, right?
Okay.
The St. Francis Hotel was one of the fanciest joints on the West Coast with telephones in every room.
No. Every room had a telephone?
I mean, that's what they say. 3 huge rooms were rented out by the trio. Room 1219 was to be a bedroom shared by Arbuckle and Fred Fishback. Lowell Sherman got his own private quarters in room 1221, and room 1220 was the designated party room. A whole gang of show business types had been invited to the party to enjoy the free-flowing booze provided by Arbuckle and his friends. This was one of the biggest draws of the party.
Usually is. Did you know that before he drove down to San Francisco, he had his car, like, getting the oil checked and serviced? He got his car serviced and he went to go pick the car up, and there was a mechanic's rag sitting in the seat of the car, and he got in the car and sat on it. But I guess that rag was soaked in acid, and it burned through his pants and burned his butt cheeks. He called, I think what I was reading said Lowell Sherman, and was telling him that he couldn't come to the party because there was no way he was going to make that drive sitting on his butt. But Lowell arranged for him to have one of those like inflatable rings to sit on.
Donut.
Yeah, to drive just to go to this party. And he had just done like three different movies all at the same time, bouncing back and forth, set to set. And one of the actors from that movie had invited him out on his yacht for the weekend. So he could have avoided this party. Seems like maybe he should have, but he went.
Wrong place, wrong time, even though it was his party.
Yeah.
The year was 1921, and Prohibition had been in full swing for 2 years, but Arbuckle and his pals managed to secure vast quantities of illegal booze. These new celebrity movie stars from Hollywood pretty much get away with whatever they wanted without consequence. It seemed unlikely that the police were going to break up a party hosted by the new legendary Fatty Arbuckle. The stars were above the law. The party attracted all types of guests eager to join the celebration, and one of those guests was Virginia Rapet. Not much is known for sure about the life of Virginia Rapet. There was quite a lot said about her after the party, but much of that was just made up to trash her character.
Virginia Rapet was from Chicago and had a pretty successful career as both a model and a fashion designer. It was during this time she became engaged to dress designer Robert Moskowitz, who then died tragically in a car accident. Later, she was in a long-term relationship with the leading silent film director and producer Harry Lehrman. It was announced around this time that she had tried to break into the movie industry herself. She hadn't yet become a famous star, largely appearing in uncredited bits in short films. She did have a single prominent role in a 1917 rom-com. Virginia was still a 30-year-old aspiring actress when she turned up to the party hosted by Arbuckle. It's believed she didn't even know him that well, and it's not known for sure if she was even invited or if she was just kind of crashing the event. At some point during the party, Virginia visited the bedroom in 1219, the bedroom that was shared by Arbuckle and Fishback, and it's said to have had some sort of encounter with Roscoe Arbuckle. Following this encounter, Virginia could be heard screaming in pain and was found writhing in agony on the bed. It was initially suspected that she might have just drank too much. The first doctor on the scene concluded that her condition was most likely caused by intoxication. There was no need for Virginia to be rushed to the hospital. Instead, she was moved to hotel room 1227 for a couple of days. Virginia's condition was deteriorating dramatically, and she was still suffering from the chronic pain in her abdomen. I also read that when they took her to that room, they put her in like an ice bath to cool her down because she was hysterical. They thought she was just being a woman.
Well, Virginia was eventually taken to Wakefield Sanatorium, where she sadly died just 2 days later from peritonitis, which is an infection of the lining that covers the abdominal organs brought on, in this case, by a ruptured bladder. Well, that's probably why they put her in the ice bath, was probably because she had a fever from infection.
Probably. That would make sense.
The question remained over exactly how Virginia Rapet had experienced a spontaneous bladder rupture over the course of the party. It's possible, yet incredibly rare, for a bladder rupture to be sparked by binge drinking, and this is the conclusion at which many people arrive. Virginia had gone way overboard with the illicit booze and effectively drunken herself to death. What really happened between Roscoe Arbuckle and Virginia Rapet in that hotel room? An alternative theory began to take shape. Arbuckle had lured Virginia into his hotel room and made unwanted sexual advances on the actress and forced himself on her. The weight of this man crushed Virginia and damaged her organs, causing her bladder to rupture, which led to the fatal infection.
That just doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense.
There would have had to already been something wrong. I mean, I know that large people can crush a small person.
I mean, the bones would be crushed and stuff, though, if it was that much weight. It's not likely.
Right.
Not likely at all.
It's not likely. A mysterious woman by the name of Maud Delmont seemed convinced that this was more than just a theory. Apparently, she was a good friend of Virginia's who had been at the party. After Maud first rushed into room 1219 upon hearing her friend scream, she came across both Arbuckle and Virginia. Virginia was laying on the bed and screaming that she was dying. Maud wasted no time in recounting her version of the story to the press, the police, and pretty much anyone else who would listen. According to Maud, her friend Virginia had been enjoying a few drinks with Arbuckle in the main party room, but she had no more than 3 in total and certainly wasn't drunk. Arbuckle had apparently seemed enthusiastic about the prospect of helping to further Virginia's movie career. He pulled her into 1219 with words, "I've waited for you for 5 years and now I've got you." Maud was concerned by this turn of events and became even more concerned when she first heard Virginia's screams. She claimed to have dashed over to the door of room 1219 only to find that it was locked. After furiously pounding fists and kicking at the locked door, she was eventually let into the room by Arbuckle, who seemed strangely in high spirits considering all the drama. Maud recalled that he was wearing a comical grin before becoming annoyed by all the noise Virginia was making, and he turned around and barked, "Shut her up or I'll throw her out the window." Just keep in mind this is Maud's version of events. He soon cheered up and skipped out of the room and went back to mingle and dance with the more considerate guests who weren't screaming. Maud's statements were backed up by 2 other female witnesses from the party.
Roscoe Arbuckle was said to be quite surprised when the police first arrived at his doorstep in Los Angeles on the 9th of September and announced that he was under arrest for the suspicion of rape and first-degree murder. It's reported that he initially thought it was a joke until he responded with a hearty laugh asking, "Who do you suppose I killed?" But his grin dropped when the police responded with the name Virginia Rapet. Arbuckle's initial defense would differ significantly from the defense he would later give in court. He claimed that Virginia had been enjoying a few drinks when she suddenly started complaining that she couldn't breathe and then became hysterical, stripping off her clothes in front of everyone. 2 of the other female guests had taken Virginia to the privacy of room 1219, where they tried to calm her down by laying her in the bathtub of cold water while Arbuckle telephoned a doctor. In this version of the story, there was no point at which Arbuckle and Virginia Rapet were alone together.
District Attorney Matthew Brady seemed determined to bring Roscoe Arbuckle to trial. And honestly, fair enough, because he got 2 witnesses that directly contradict his statement. Brady kicked off by issuing his own statements to the press. "The evidence in my possession shows conclusively that either a rape or an attempt to rape was perpetrated on Miss Rapet by Roscoe Arbuckle. The evidence discloses beyond question that her bladder was ruptured by the weight of the body of Arbuckle either in an assault or an attempt to commit rape." Arbuckle was held without bail at the San Francisco Hall of Justice. Matthew Brady pushed on with the prosecution so quickly that much of the crucial evidence, such as an autopsy result, wasn't even available yet. He seemed to think that the testimony provided by his star witness, Maud Delmont, and the 2 other party guests would be more than enough to send Roscoe Arbuckle to the gallows. He quickly realizes that his star witness was about as reliable as a politician's promise.
That ain't very reliable at all.
Not at all. Brady's suspicions began when he noticed that Maud couldn't stick to the same version of events. In one version of a story, Virginia barely drank anything at all, while in another version she had downed 8 to 10 whiskeys. She was either sober as a judge or all the way messed up. In one version, she and Virginia were lifelong friends, and in another version, they only met a few days prior to the party. These are not just slightly different, these are huge differences. After digging a little deeper, Brady discovered that Maud had a pretty extensive criminal record for bigamy, fraud, and extortion. If that wasn't bad enough, She sent a telegram to another friend while Virginia was still screaming in pain at the hospital. It said, "We have Roscoe Arbuckle in a hole here. Chance to make money out of him." Brady knew that there was no way he could use Delmont as a witness. Matthew Brady had been described by acquaintances as a self-serving, ruthless man with blind ambition and a quick temper. The decision on whether or not Arbuckle would ultimately face trial would be in the hands of Judge Sylvain Lazarus. He eventually ruled that Arbuckle should be put on trial, but on the reduced charge of manslaughter rather than first-degree murder. And just to recap, Matthew Brady was pursuing a prosecution triggered by a known extortionist who couldn't get her story straight, and he knew she wanted to get money out of Arbuckle. Even though Judge Lazarus seemed to agree that the prosecution's case had holes and that Arbuckle barely even deserved to be detained, he pretty much says, "Yeah, let's see how this turns out."
That seems like a typical judge to me.
Seems like he didn't have anything better to do and was like, "Y'all can put a show on for me." And that's pretty much what happened.
Of course, this made all the headlines. The newspapers couldn't get enough of it over the following months. Doctored photographs of Arbuckle ran with the headlines such as "Arbuckle faces gallows" and "Fatty arraigned as slayer." Some of the press gave a reasonably fair perspective of the events, but popular newspapers owned by William Randolph Hearst took more of a judgmental stance. Seeing as William Randolph Hearst is basically famous for inventing yellow journalism, it's not really surprising. One of the most notable cases of tabloid-style exaggerated headlines or yellow journalism that William Randolph Hearst is responsible for printing is the Reaper Madness propaganda, which is still having reverberating effects in our society almost 100 years later. Roscoe Arbuckle was depicted as a drug addict and a drunk who preyed on young defenseless women. An editorial cartoon in the San Francisco Examiner portrayed Arbuckle in the middle of a spider's web, drinking from 2 liquor bottles and contemplating on 7 women who had been caught in his web. You would think Hearst was another individual who had it out for Arbuckle, but he was more about shifting newspapers. He just wanted to make money. When another Arbuckle story appeared on the front page, sales would go through the roof. Hearst himself would say, "I sold more newspapers during the Arbuckle trials than when the Lusitania went down." It's wrongly reported that Arbuckle had to defend himself in court against allegations that he had assaulted Virginia with a piece of ice. Then it was a Coke bottle. Then it was a champagne bottle. The story originated in one of Hearst's publications in an attempt to sell even more papers. This was never brought up in court, nor was it ever in any witness statements. The media made it up.
Rage bait. It's what people do online now. They say things just to make people fight about it.
I mean, you can't hear my head nodding, but it's nodding.
Roscoe Arbuckle did get some support from family and friends. His then estranged wife, Minta Durfee, traveled from her mother's home in California to attend the first trial and posed for pictures standing loyally by Roscoe's side. Studio executives warned actors not to speak publicly in defense of Arbuckle to avoid any further association with this Hollywood scandal. All of Arbuckle's films had already been banned from cinemas, but everyone assumed it would be lifted when Arbuckle was found to be innocent. Most actors complied with the studio's request, most likely in fear of destroying their own careers. Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin were both brave enough to speak out to the press in support of Arbuckle. Chaplin told the press Roscoe was a genuine and easygoing guy, and he wouldn't have harmed a fly. A big chunk of the general public seemed to agree with the sentiment, maybe finding it hard to believe that the lovable, comical star of the silver screen could have been responsible for the death of an innocent woman. Unfortunately, not everyone felt this way, because before the main trial even got underway, Hundreds of women gathered around the San Francisco courthouse to protest against the acceptance of sexual misconduct in society and demanding Roscoe Arbuckle be held accountable for his crimes. This was going on when Roscoe Arbuckle arrived at the city courthouse on November 14th, 1921.
Grace Holston was a local nurse who tended to Virginia after she had been rushed to the hospital. Grace appeared to glare angrily at Arbuckle throughout her testimony. She told Brady she believed Arbuckle raped Virginia because there were bruises on her body and her internal organs had been torn in a way that suggested brute force. Under cross-examination, Grace admitted that it was possible that the bruises could have been caused by heavy jewelry that Virginia was wearing, and the bladder rupture could have been the result of an existing medical condition.
She changed her story real quick.
It seems like it. Brady questioned Dr. Arthur Beardsley, who was the hotel doctor first on the scene. Dr. Beardsley seemed to think that Virginia's ruptured bladder may have been caused by external force, despite the fact that he initially seemed to conclude that Virginia was just suffering from the effects of heavy intoxication. The doctor later admitted that Virginia never once said anything that implicated Roscoe Arbuckle during the time he was with her. Local criminologist Dr. Edwin Heinrich took to the stand with what he believed to be compelling evidence. Heinrich claims he found Virginia's fingerprints on the door handle of the hotel room, which was superimposed by Arbuckle's fingerprints. This meant his fingerprints were on top of hers. A former federal investigator, Ignatius McCarthy, later took the stand to propose that he believed the fingerprints were faked. The hotel maid insisted that the whole room had been cleaned several times from top to bottom before any investigation took place. The experts aren't doing a very good job of convincing anyone of Arbuckle's guilt.
No.
Two guests claimed to have heard Virginia confirm that Arbuckle was responsible. Partygoer Alice Blake initially told police that she had also heard Virginia, but refused to confirm her statement in court. Sounds to me like she was fine lying to the police, just not under oath.
Zay Prevon made a mockery of her original police statement in court. Now she says she didn't see very much and was repeating what she was told, that Virginia Rapay went into the bedroom with Roscoe Arbuckle because she wanted to. Then she claimed that that's all she had to say about it. Well, it wasn't all she had to say. She went on to say that she'd always considered Arbuckle to be a kind and thoughtful man. Matthew Brady called another party guest as a witness. Model Betty Campbell revealed in a testimony that Arbuckle was smiling just a few hours after the incident. Later on cross-examination, Betty admitted that the prosecution threatened to get her sent to prison if she didn't cooperate and testify against Arbuckle. The prosecution was tripping up at every turn. Roscoe Arbuckle took the stand. His testimony took over 4 hours, and it is reported that he appeared calm. No one seems to be able to recall what they said, what they did, or what they witnessed. Even Arbuckle's story significantly changed since he originally spoke with the police and press. He claimed that he had never once been alone with Virginia Rapay, who suddenly became hysterical and started stripping off her clothes in the main party room. He now claimed that he had gone into his bedroom in room 1219 in order to finally change out of those pajamas, bathrobe, and slippers. He was surprised to discover Virginia vomiting in the toilet of his bathroom. At first, he assumed she just had too much to drink. He became more concerned when Virginia began trying to tear her clothes off while screaming in pain. Arbuckle helped her out of her dress and laid her on the bed. He didn't spend more than 10 minutes alone with her before he called other guests in to help.
I just have to say, that's rule number one. Never help a woman out of her clothes,
Yeah,
unless she asks you to.
unless she says, oh, please do that. Maud Delmont applied ice to Virginia's stomach to try to cool her down. Then Maud became very confrontational with Arbuckle. He eventually lost his patience and threatened to throw her out of the window if she didn't shut up. Gavin McNabb had originally intended to present several negative views on Virginia's personal life and medical history, but Arbuckle didn't want him to do that out of respect for Virginia. He was also pretty confident of a not guilty verdict. That's not what happened, though. After 44 hours of deliberation, the jury conceded defeat and returned to the courtroom to declare a hung jury. They were deadlocked 10-2. Majority in favor of acquittal and a mistrial was ruled.
One of the two jury members who voted for conviction, Helen Hubbard, had reportedly told other jurors that she would continue voting guilty until hell freezes over, and had refused to even examine exhibits or read transcripts during the deliberations. Turns out her husband was a lawyer with close connections to the prosecutor, Matthew Brady. Arbuckle's defense team certainly seemed a lot more relaxed during the second trial, which got underway on January 11, 1922. Gavin McNabb decided that Buckle didn't even need to testify for this one, and McNabb himself didn't even need to bother to deliver a closing statement. He just assumed it was in the bag. Dr. Heinrich was back in court for the retrial. He was the criminologist who said he found incriminating overlapping fingerprints on the handle of the door, which had already been debunked by former federal investigator in the hotel. Dr. Heinrich now took back his original testimony and said that he had been mistaken about the authenticity of the fingerprints and now believed them to be fake. The outcome of the trial may have seemed like a no-brainer for the defense, but the verdict was surprising. After another 40 hours of deliberations, another hung jury was declared, leading to another mistrial. The jury deadlocked in a 10-2 vote, but this time the 10-2 majority was quite bizarrely in favor of conviction of Roscoe Arbuckle. The third trial began on March 13, 1922, and this time they were going all in. Gavin McNabb didn't hold back. He found witnesses who claimed Virginia drank heavily at parties. They said she had been in the habit of taking her clothes off in front of the other guests and was known to be sexually active. Witnesses also implied that her health condition may have been poor due to as many as 5 illegal abortions dating from when she was a young teenager. Some of those procedures may have been badly botched. Gavin McNabb was determined to paint the victim in a negative light. These were not expert medical witnesses, and there was no evidence to go along with their testimony. This third jury took all of 6 minutes to declare their unanimous verdict.
Roscoe Arbuckle was not guilty. They also put together a statement which served as an apology on behalf of the United States for ever putting Arbuckle on trial. The statement was read out loud in court by the jury foreman. Acquittal is not enough for Roscoe Arbuckle. We feel that a great injustice has been done to him. We feel also that it was only our duty to give him this exoneration under the evidence, for there was not the slightest proof used to connect him in any way with the commission of a crime. He was manly throughout the case and told a straightforward story on the witness stand, which we all believed the happening at the hotel was an unfortunate affair for which Arbuckle, so the evidence shows, was in no way responsible. We wish him success and hope the American people will take the judgment of 14 men and women who have sat listening for 31 days to evidence that Roscoe Arbuckle is entirely innocent and free from all blame. One of the things everyone could agree on, Fatty did have booze at this party during Prohibition, so he got fined $500 after being found guilty of violating the Volstead Act. We will never know all the details, but we do know Virginia Rapay tragically died from a pre-existing health condition and that Roscoe Arbuckle had been cleared of any charges relating to her death. The courts had wiped Arbuckle's slate clean, but with the cost of the multiple trials and Paramount terminating his $3 million contract, Arbuckle had to sell his mansion and his cars to pay off the $700,000 he owed in legal fees. That's close to $12 million today. Arbuckle needed to get back to work and earning money, but his films were still banned, and he had become the first Hollywood star to ever be blacklisted in the industry. Hollywood had been rocked by the scandal. Now everyone knew that they had wild parties with illegal booze and they were adulterers. Protest groups were suggesting that the completely unregulated industry was built on immorality and the studios could produce their corruptive material without fear of restriction or any kind of censorship. They didn't want the government to get involved and start imposing their own strict regulations on the growing industry, so major movers in Hollywood got together and formed a new organization called the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. They appointed the former postmaster, William H. Hayes, in charge. Hayes introduced the Code of Conduct guidelines known as the Hayes Code. Unfortunately, one of Hayes's very first acts as the head of the new organization was to ban the screenings of any Roscoe Arbuckle films and also ban him from appearing in any new ones. Hayes later recalled in his autobiography that the studios felt the scandal involved the whole industry, and Arbuckle had to be thrown under the bus to deflect any further speculation about what the other wealthy movie stars might be getting up to in their spare time. The ban may have seemed like a harsh punishment for an innocent man, but it only actually lasted about 8 months before William H. Hayes moved to lift it. For many years afterwards, theaters were still reluctant to show old Arbuckle movies, and the actor found it difficult to find work. Arbuckle became pretty depressed and started drinking heavily. They stayed good friends, but Minta eventually filed for divorce in 1925. She later said Roscoe was the most generous human being she'd ever met, and if she had to do it all over again, she would still marry the same man.
Arbuckle remarried the same year to actress Doris Dean, but his alcoholism led to an unhappy relationship. Doris filed for a divorce just 3 years later on the grounds of desertion. Arbuckle managed to get a few parts in short films in the 1920s. It was definitely not like when he was the leading man in feature films. He wasn't in front of the camera much anymore, but instead was behind it working as a director. He worked as a director on a series of low-profile shorts under the pseudonym William Goodrich. Actress Louise Brooks recalls feeling a sense of excitement when she realized she was going to be directed by the legendary Roscoe Arbuckle in the 1931 comic short Wendy Riley Goes to Hollywood, but she was left somewhat disappointed. She claimed that he had made no attempt to direct this picture, he just sat in the director's chair like a dead man. Things were actually starting to look up for Arbuckle by 1932 in both his professional and personal life. He sobered up and married his third wife, actress Addie MacPhail. That same year, Fatty made a comeback to the silver screen. He signed a deal with Warner Brothers to star in 6 two-reelers shown in 1932 and 1933. The silent film star even got the chance to use his voice in these fancy new flicks for the first time. 4 of these shorts had already been released by the time Roscoe and Addie were celebrating their first wedding anniversary on June 28, 1933. The couple invited a small group of friends out to dinner as a joint celebration of the wedding anniversary and the beginning of Roscoe's comeback. Arbuckle is reported to have told his friends, "This is the best day of my life." They didn't know it, but it was the last day of his life. That same night, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle died in his sleep from a heart attack. He was 46 years old. In a heartfelt eulogy, 20th Century Fox co-founder Joseph Schneck said, "All who have ever known the real Roscoe Arbuckle will always treasure the great, generous heart of the man. He was the tragedy of a man born to make the world laugh, and to receive only suffering as a reward, and to the end held no malice." Many will remember Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle as the comedic genius he was, but he also was the first victim of cancel culture and the man who accidentally prompted a cleanup of Hollywood. A movie on Arbuckle's rise and fall has been in development for several decades, but the problem is that the big name attached to the star role has always ended up dropping dead before the camera can start rolling. John Belushi was one of the first names attached to the screenplay, but he died in 1982. Stand-up comedian and actor Sam Kinison was later offered the role, but he was tragically killed in 1992 in a car collision with a drunk driver. John Candy was said to have signed on to play Arbuckle before he suddenly died from a heart attack in his sleep in 1994. And comedian Chris Farley was reportedly offered the role on the condition that he stayed clean for 2 years in order to film and secure insurance, but he died from a drug overdose in 1997. Apparently, the film is still in development.
I hope they actually do it. I would like to see that movie. Any idea who's next in line to play Fatty?
No, I don't really know of any actors today that could play that role better than Chris Farley could have, but I'm not sure anyone would want to get that role now because it seems to have a curse on it or something.
That's actually what people say, that the role does have a curse attached to it. Could it have been the amount of drugs and alcohol that these people consumed that led to their deaths instead of a curse? Maybe. But who knows? Maybe they would have been able to live longer even doing the drugs and drinking had they not accepted that role.
Well, it does seem like quite the coincidence that that many people died after getting that role.
Yeah, like one or two. Might not think too much about it. But there's like four or five.
Yeah, that's just too many coincidences.
Yeah, to where it's not a coincidence, might be a curse.
Seems like a curse to me.
Sounds like a curse. Had you heard the story about Fatty before?
No, not really.
I hadn't either. I knew Fatty Arbuckle was a comedic actor in silent films, but I didn't know about all the scandal.
Yeah, that was news to me. All right.
That's all the information I have on Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle's Hollywood scandal. And a lot of it I'm not really even sure is correct information because it seems like in this story, everyone's story changes.
There was definitely a lot of flip flopping going on.
But you know what's not going to change?
What's that?
The ability that people have to like and subscribe.
Oh. All right.
Okay.
If you liked what you heard, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, drop a comment down below if you have any suggestions for stories you would like us to cover.
Heck yeah. Thanks, everybody. Bye.